Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barbara Widholm, and I'm honored to be here today. I'm a vice president at State Street. Those of you who do not know who State Street is, we are the second largest custodians in the world. We service clients' assets, and our clients are mostly asset managers, institutions, endowments, so it's not so much retail focused. I have the privilege of working with teams at the forefront of integrating artificial intelligence, automation into financial services, and I'm passionate about exploring how emerging technologies can shape the future of finance and create new opportunities. And for today's session, I want to share with you some of the best practices, some of the use cases that we have explored, and hopefully you find this useful and you can go and go back to your own industries and share some of these examples and experiences. So I think when I first looked into the metaverse, I got very interested to see what is actually the timeline of the metaverse, how did it all evolve, and it was very interesting to see that I think back in 1992, an author called Neil Stephenson actually coined the term metaverse in his novel Snow Crash, it was then other memorable, notable moments, such as the launch of Second Life in 2003, which created one of the first virtual and social worlds, and the introduction of the Oculus Rift in 2012, which was really a pivotal moment for virtual reality technology. And I think in 2021, when Meta, formerly known as Facebook, rebranded itself as Meta, and then I guess the recent launch and announcement of the augmented reality glasses. So it's really interesting just to see the evolution. When I first started talking about the metaverse, augmented reality, and virtual reality at work, I thought it would be really good to have a demystification session. So what are these technologies, and what is it not? So back then, I think it was about 5 years ago now, I asked our former chief operating officer to host a session with us on the metaverse. And the first thing that he said to me was, well, if I have to speak in front of the whole of State Street about the metaverse, I have to actually experience and see what it is. And I think he made a really fair point on that, because it's sometimes when you try to explain new technology, it's like explaining to the blind what color is. Without you experiencing firsthand, it's sometimes difficult to talk about it. So we partnered up with a consulting company, and they created different experiences for him. So we created a digital representation of our office where he could engage with certain objects. We could have had client meetings in there, whiteboarding sessions, and he, at the end of the session, he was like, yeah, I get it now. I see what the opportunity here is. I have to also stress he's an avid gamer, so I think maybe that was more easily for him to understand and comprehend, I guess, the technologies. So when we talk about, I guess, the metaverse, AI, and VR, I think what was really compelling for financial services to look at these technologies was, I think, the potential revenue opportunities that are attached to that. For example, JP Morgan predicted that there is 1 trillion in annual revenues available in the market. By 2031, they predicted there will be a total addressable market value from 8 to 13 trillion opportunities. By 2030, it is projected that the numbers of metaverse users will exceed 1.4 billion, with users penetrating increasing to nearly 18%. So this is I think at the moment, if you look at the top graph, it's increased from 2018 to 50, I think, million users to 600 million users now in 2026. Another interesting, I guess, statistic is looking at it from a, I guess, gender and generational difference. Because when I look, for example, at my organization, I think people that are more easily want to adopt new technologies are usually, I would say, the millennials, the Gen Z, and the Gen Alpha. And it's sometimes much more difficult, I guess, to get different generations excited about this technology. So I thought this was very an interesting graph there that represents that. Also interestingly, I guess there's a slightly difference on genders as well. I spoke to one consultancy who made the argument that a lot of the content that is out there today is mostly geared towards male users, whether that's true or not, or whether that has changed. is yet to be seen, I guess. And then also the challenge on motion sickness, and I think which is more prevalent for females, so that maybe there's a differences on why the usage is slightly different. So let's talk about what are some of the current use cases that we have seen of AR and VR. So it's definitely, and I think this definitely increased during the pandemic when we had to move everything virtually. So virtual training is one of the biggest use cases that we have also explored. Training, I think, for new joiners, or training for clients, for example, when they join State Street. Just really of the retention of how the content, can be remembered, because it's so virtually, because it's so immersive, that you just remember the content better. So that's one of the biggest use cases that I've seen. The other one is remote collaboration. So as I've mentioned, having a remote virtual workspace where you can whiteboard session, train with other people. Especially during the pandemic, this was definitely something that we've explored further. And then I've also mentioned other industries here. I think customer experience is not so prevalent for us because, as I mentioned, our clients are mostly institutions, and then other sectors are here represented as well. So healthcare, simulation, retail, manufacturing. If you look at it from a future perspective, virtual offices is one of the biggest use cases, and I can definitely see a use case for that since the pandemic. I think we shifted more towards a hybrid working model. So not everybody wants to come, not saying wants to come back, but not everybody might not come back 4 days per week to the office. So is there a way of bringing people together, being virtually together, if we cannot be physically at the same space? And then immersive learning, I think, is something also very, very interesting. Learning about new concepts that it can be explained in virtual reality. So for example, there was one, maybe not as prevalent to my industry, but learning a new language in virtual reality. I think that's something that I've explored, and definitely I felt from a learning perspective, that helped me definitely a lot. So let's take a look at more financial services. So what are the use cases for financial services? I think this is more a harder question, in particular for institutions. What I've shown you here is, is an example from Fidelity, something called Stock City. It's a project that they've worked on in 2014, so it's a bit old. But they try to represent stock values, average day volumes, shares outstanding through the form of a city. But essentially, it is just a bar graph with some grass and streets. Some other use cases, which is more, I would say, specific to institutions. One of them where I really saw a good opportunity was integrating, when you have a meeting in virtual reality, for example, with a client, you could lay over some additional data. So for example, we are using Salesforce, where we have our client data are all stored in there. And we could, for example, if I have a meeting with my client, I could overlay all of the information about my clients into VR that only I can see, and then I can bring up the information or look at it whilst I have the meeting with my client. So I think that would be one of the really good use cases. So that I don't have to remember all of the content. Another one is I think one of these, the newer headsets, they have a numbers of using facing cameras, and those cameras exist primarily to track the user's face, to represent realistic expressions. But I think these expressions now can be read by an AI to provide insights into how is the customer receiving my pitch, what resonates very well, what didn't, and then you could overlay it with generative AI, looking at the sentiment, for example, and then it could give you afterwards a debrief of what worked well, what didn't work well, what you need to improve on, and then maybe enhancing with some other tools storytelling, what you can do better next time, right? The second use case, I think this is the more obvious one, and this is the one that I'm going to be talking about later, is data visualization. So having data represented in 3 dimensions, either in virtual reality or in augmented reality. It's a space, I think, where the approach to visualizing data in the metaverse can add real benefit. So instead of imagination, the scale and consequences of large numbers, we can actually visualize for the user what those large quantities actually are. So this is a capability that I think is today close to impossible. When we, for example, have meetings today, we would bring up a PowerPoint, we would see 2D graphs, and it's not going to give you the same, I would say, depth. So for example, in wealth and asset managers, when we have client meetings, like, we could have, we could leverage the metaverse where it becomes a new powerful tool to communicate situational awareness to customers about their portfolio, for example, as well as educating them about new opportunities or risk or financial concepts, which they may not immediately understand. So thanks to incorporating 3D visualization, this new learning, I think, modality means that the customers are getting educated on new concepts and opportunities involving their finances. They can learn that much more, I would say, quicker and understand these concepts at 4 times faster speed and feel almost 4 times as confident about the content that they have learned. Another interesting thought is like, I think like for every employee that we have when we onboard them from a, I would say, not saying technical perspective, but from a hardware perspective, they would get a laptop, they would get 2 to 3 screens, they would have a docking station, a keyboard, a mouse, and a headset. So I think the cost could range between $3,000 to $6,000 today. So instead of like, having all of this hardware or equipment, the new VR headsets having, I would say, the HMDs that they have would allow employees to simulate all of those devices with the fidelity that would meet or even exceed the physical twin. They could take these devices anywhere that they want to, and it could potentially, like in the future, significantly reduce cost. And the last one that I want to mention, because I think this was very, very interesting, during COVID, for example, when people weren't able to travel, they did a study afterwards that they actually said that it resulted actually a net positive for the planet with a reduction of nearly 5% in global greenhouse gas emission. They also did a study where they were analyzing like office spaces, and they did say that today office buildings generate approximately 900 million metric tons of CO2 and take up about roughly 40% of the electricity consumed in the United States today. So there could an argument be made for in the future, maybe we do not need physical space anymore and we all could move to a virtual office. I want to show you a short clip on a startup that spun out of MIT in Boston, where they kind of like explored the concept of being together in a space, not physically, but virtually, where you have your own office space, you can walk around, you can chat up your colleagues, you can ask questions, you can have meetings, and it kind of like feels that you are being together whilst not being together physically. So we did trial that out during the pandemic, and it was an interesting concept. So the company is called SoWork. So let me, sorry, I went too quick. So I'm going to shift gears now, and I want to show you like 3 use cases that we have done within State Street. It's all focusing around data visualization, and as I've mentioned before, the advantages is like you can notice new trends, you can capture a wider range of information, you can incorporate space and time. It's very immersive and very interactive. So this graph it represents scientific data. It represents the global carbon dioxide levels on Earth. You can see the sheer amount of information represented here, the intensity, the location, and the elevation, and changes over time. But all of this is very, I would say, intuitive, easy to understand, because it combines elements seamlessly, like in a 3D diagram. Just for those of you, just as a recap, just want to touch upon definition of virtual reality. What we mean by that, a simulated 3D digital environment or space that users can interact with that mimics the spatial characteristics of the real world through digital models. Whereas augmented reality means a simulated environment that combines virtual reality and the real world by incorporating 3D digital models into the scanned surroundings of the real world. Let me just, sorry, I'm not going to go to that. So this is the first use case that we explored. And again, similar to when we talked about metaverse, AR, and VR, we were asked the question, well, what does a data visualization looks like in 3D and augmented reality? So we partnered up with a consulting company, and we did look at the graph that was mentioned in the Wall Street Journal that reported on the yield curve inversion phenomenon of US Treasuries, which you can see on the left. They then took this data and then they created a kind of like 3-dimensional model that you can see here. it's like different views of the same data set, but it's just like gives it a different depth. You can look at it like from different angles. You can add in different data or different labels on it that you couldn't do in a 2D graph. There's also a QR code, so if you want to try it out later, or I can distribute it later, so you can also try out this graph yourself. But this was one of the first use cases like that we circulated internally, just to get ideas of what data visualization could look like and what are the opportunities. We then wanted to further explore that, but I think the challenge that we had was we didn't really have the technical knowledge and expertise of building all of that in-house. So State Street has an internship program where we would hire students from university that would be with us for a period of 6 months. And when I was looking to hire somebody for my team, I asked our human resources team to find somebody that has software development skills or has skills or expertise in the gaming industry. And then I came across a really interesting resume from Christine Cho. She's actually here today. She is a student at a Northeastern University, and her background is in architectural studies and designs. And I thought it was very, very interesting because she had the skill sets of modeling, 3 dimensions modeling, of buildings. So we did hire her. And the first, assignment that we asked her was to create a digital twin of our new headquarters. So we opened that up last year to our clients, and the idea would be to create a digital representation so when clients come and visit the building, they could scan a QR code and they can take a digital version of them with them. So Christine went away. She came up with a final model. She used, as a references, floor plans, diagrams, elevations. She used a computer software called Rhino, which is mostly used in the, architecture space to model 3-dimensional designs, buildings. And that was the final model that she built before laying textures over it. So this is the final model that she came up with in Rhino. I then did ask her to make it a bit more realistic, so our headquarters had glass windows, was very metallic, shiny. So she went away during her internship. She learned how to use Blender, which is mostly used for in the gaming industry. And she was able to take this final model that she built in Rhino, put it in Blender, and then she basically created this final model here. You can see on here, Blender allows you to add, different level of roughnesses here, different level of metallic sheen here. And then, so this is, the final model that she created then in Blender. And then I did ask her, so, we wanted to make it a bit more interactive so that clients, can actually play around with that model. So she did use Adobe Area for that. And again, if you want to try it out later, all you have to do is scan the QR code, press the continue button. You need a bigger surface though. Once it says it has found the surface, you click on your phone so that it's anchored, and then the model will appear. So she did create different interactions with the model. So for example, we have a night mode. We have because it was digital at the time, we have a Bitcoin mode, different colors for our, logo on top, and then you can combine different scenarios as well. And that's kind of what the model looks like, the final model. It was very well received, it was very interactive. People really liked it. We then asked her to, because that was the ultimate reasons why we wanted to hire somebody with her skill sets, to create a data visualization. So in augmented reality in 3 dimensions. So we gave her a dummy data set. So you can see emerging market equities, foreign equities, US equities. There was a pre-existing scatter plot that she had as a references. The only ask that we had from her was to create the outliers in a different color. Again, she used Rhino for that, brought in all the different data points, and she used a program called Grasshopper, which is part of Rhino, that basically creates relations between all of the different data points, as you can see on here. And this is the final model that she built in Grasshopper. Again, importing it into Blender to add more textures, to refine it. This is the model, the final Blender model. So again, changing colors, changing the roughness. Obviously, you can see all the differences that we tried out, or that she tried out. And this is the final model that she created, like in Rhino. And then, as per previous example as well, we wanted to make it more interactive and engaging. So she used Aereo again to build in some buttons where you can engage with the model. So, for example, you can make the model smaller, you can make it larger, you can remove all of the axes, only have certain axes visible. And then my favorite is like where you can actually rotate the model around and then like have selective view of one data point. So, for example, you can click on that, it will tell you the coordinates, or if you click on it, it can change color or it can disappear altogether. This is like what we did in the office, like so kind of like looking at the model. I think like when I was looking in the wrong direction, but initially, but just I guess like just to see like how something like that could look like in the future. So yeah. And then the final version that the final project that she did was actually something we used in a conference for our FX 101 conference. So this basically looks at the currency annual return and including 3 different currencies, euro, pound, and yen, different times, and then we also added in like different events. So again, using Rhino initially to plot in all the data points, so adding in its spheres here, and then kind of like replicating the process for the different data points. And then once the data points were all there, she added in all the labels. So for example, we had like different scenarios like, oil prices fall, global financial crisis, Brexit, the Fed. How would it like, what impact would it have to all of the different currencies? Adding, different colors for the events. And this is the final model that she came up with in Rhino. And then after she put the model in Blender, it looked something like that. And then adding in some animations again. I think we made it again small, larger. We removed the background, and like we have like certain data points where you can kind of like select certain data points and certain scenarios that you want to just see by themselves. Yeah, again, if you want to see what this looks like, you can download the QR code. You can try it out yourself. So yeah, so what is kind of like the future of AR and VR? So what was some of the learning that we took away from that? So I think like, definitely adoption is one of the biggest challenges. So how can you get like, buy-in on this technology? How can you get like, different people kind of like, want to use it? I think that remains one of the biggest challenge. Also having, I would say, the relevant skill sets. So somebody that actually can build all of those, right? And then I would, and I would also say, what is the best of use cases? Because like one of the questions that we will also get, like if we invest in it, if we build all of that, what is the return on the investment there, right? What is the ROI there, right? But I would say once the technology gets better, I guess, like, the glasses maybe become like less heavy, and also where you can bring in some real-time data. So for example, I can see a use case where as a portfolio manager, you look at your portfolio, you can bring in certain market events, news feeds, real-time, real life, and then basically model out certain scenarios, right? I would say that is one of the use cases that I can see or that resonated really, really well within our organization. I'll leave it here. There's a short video there, but it's like, I'll leave it here for questions.
Okay, thank you very much.